Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Congressman Hank Johnson, and I'm pleased to be here at the invitation of Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Policing, Constitution and Equality Task Force. And so I'm proud to be here with the Congresswoman, along with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee, who chairs the very important Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee on Crime. And we're here today to talk about the United States Supreme Court. And today, a 6-3 supermajority on the United States Supreme Court threatens our rights, our democracy, and our planet. To restore our democracy, the first thing we can do, or one of the first things we should do, is to actually expand the United States Supreme Court. Republicans have been about constructing a United States Supreme Court that reflects their most extreme ideology. It's been a 40-year plus effort. It has involved dark money, fueled by the Koch brothers and others, funneled through organizations like the Federalist Society, which, by the way, just a few months ago received a $1.5 billion donation in dark money so that it can continue to wield its influence on the judiciary, throughout the judiciary, federal district courts, courts of appeals, and of course the United States Supreme Court, which they have already captured. This is against the will of America's voters. Democrats have won more votes in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections and represent 40 million more people in the Senate. Yet Republicans have appointed 15 of the last 19 justices onto the United States Supreme Court, including by stealing seats in 2016 and 2020. The court's radical right-wing justices have spent years dismantling our democracy, inviting big corporate spending into our elections in Citizens United, demolishing the foundation of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County, in allowing partisan gerrymandering in the Rucho case. And last year, the court stripped millions of women of their right to abortion in the Dobbs case, while issuing an edict ruling that affirmative action in higher education is unconstitutional in violation of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And they're just getting started, folks. Upcoming decisions by the Supreme Court include overturning previous court precedent on the power of federal regulators. The future viability of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is on the stake. The power of states to prohibit persons under domestic violence protection orders from possessing a firearm is at the table. And last but not least, the ability of states under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, to have the power to keep the name of an insurrectionist off of the presidential ballot. Congress has the power to legislate how many justices will serve on the nation's highest court, and in fact, Congress has changed the number of justices on the court 7 times throughout American history, and it's clear to me that the time has come for Congress to adjust the numbers again, which is why I have introduced the Judiciary Act of 2023, which would add 4 seats onto the United States Supreme Court. That's a short-term fix, because long-term, the same kind of court capture can take hold when you have lifetime tenure of Supreme Court justices. And that's why I've introduced legislation. It's known as the Term Act, which would impose an 18-year term limit on Supreme Court justices' active service on the United States Supreme Court. And in the process of that Term Act, it would end up as a situation where every 2 years a justice rotates off the bench and a new justice rotates onto the bench. That way we can kind of protect the court from this institutionalized dark money capture that threatens us for the next 30, 40 years with these young people having been appointed to the court and eligible to serve for another 30, 40 years. So in addition to that, the court has seen fit due to public pressure, and I want to thank all of you all for imposing a code of conduct on itself for the first time. But unfortunately, the code lacks the teeth of an enforcement mechanism. So justices are still able to do whatever they want to do, like Clarence Thomas refusing to recuse himself from hearing cases involving the January 6th insurrection, even though his own wife was a participant in the run-up to January 6th. He's refused to recuse himself thus far. So we need a code of conduct that would actually force him to recuse himself. And so, ladies and gentlemen, legislation has been introduced. Appreciate your support for it. And next, I will yield the floor to my dear friend from the great state of Houston, Texas, the Honorable Sheila Jackson-Lee.
It is our time. It is long overdue, and I'm delighted to be here with Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and as well Hank Johnson, and to be part of the Policing Constitutional Equality Task Force. But it really is our time to take charge of the highest court in the land. While the court sits, my governor in the state of Texas is blatantly ignoring a Supreme Court decision. And ignoring it from the perspective of what is best for the people of the state of Texas and for the people of this nation. Confronting the idea of the supremacy of the Supreme Court and the federal government and our commander-in-chief, and gathering 15 governors and saying that they will not give up federal land for those who are entrusted to guide those federal lands. We're now at odds, a standoff, possible war between Texas National Guard and the Border Patrol agents. However you may agree or disagree, the United States has always accepted the idea of the legislature, the executive, and the courts. And that's Article III courts, Supreme Court being the highest court in the land. And here we are now being subjected to courts, or the court, literally ignoring precedent, which is a guiding force that all of us were willing to abide by. When the court settled on principle and law, we as Americans said, we will abide by it. Here I am today telling you that now your courage is called upon. Your insight is called upon. Your call for freedom is called upon. And I commend the courageous advocacy that is in this room. And I'm proud to stand with all of you as we make our voices heard across the country on the importance of restoring fairness and balance to the Supreme Court and protecting the civil and human rights of everyone in this nation. That is not the case now. I'm reminded of the era of the civil rights movement, when how dastardly things were in the Deep South, how governors stood in courthouse doors, university doors, the civil rights activists, the likes of Dr. King, Ralph David Abernathy, and Andrew Young, and others, the foot soldiers, all believed that if they could just get to the federal court, there would be some relief. That is not the case now. You can drag yourself to the front doors of the federal court, drag yourself up the steps of the United States Supreme Court, and still be rejected, still not get the relief in climate change, in the protecting of clean air, and toxic water. None of that seems to appeal to the members of the court at this time. It is no secret that the U.S. Supreme Court has emerged as a central threat to American democracy. The Republican majority's rulings on issues ranging from reproductive freedoms and gun violence, prevention to voting rights and affirmative action, are taking our court backwards in a way that we could never imagine, and have caused public approval of the court to hit historic lows. But many of us grew up with the greatest respect for the United States Supreme Court. Remember being barred into the court, meaning sworn into the court. And it was such a great honor to stand there and be made a member of the United States Supreme Court bar. As the court's legitimacy wanes, it is critical to engage in the difficult work of not only raising public awareness around solutions to confront this crisis, but enacting change. That is why we must act now to stop the erosion of the freedoms we have fought so hard to achieve, to protect citizens and save lives. Americans are a can-do people. We do not bemoan our problems and accept terrible outcomes. We have to solve them. It's important to acknowledge that we all stand on the powerful and mighty shoulders of our ancestors, civil rights icons, and generations of leaders and fighters through their momentous occasion or efforts to keep moving, to keep fighting. We must continue in our struggle for justice. That is what the cause of expanding the court must be. Not just our own selfish whims. Oh, we'd like to see a larger court. We'd like to give more opportunity to outstanding jurists and lawyers to be on the court. We'd like to get our favorite appointee on the court. We'd like to give a Democratic president the right to make appointments. That is not the cause. The cause is saving lives. It is saving lives from the onslaught of the emerging attack on America with climate change, the rage of gun violence, so that laws that would contain the utilization of guns and assault weapons are not protected by the United States Supreme Court. They do not see our equal protection under the law. They're ignoring civil rights icons. They're ridding the most prestigious civil rights law, the voting rights law. They're ridding the voting rights law of the anchor, Section 5. That was the Supreme Court that, in the Shelby case, destroyed the very backbone of voting rights and civil rights, Section 5, which gave individual plaintiffs the right to freedom and to be heard. And so we come to a time where their voices and victories must be forever uplifted, be the impetus for drastically and desperately needed change, policies that will protect and support all women, children, families, and those most vulnerable. And I can assure you, as the ranking member and former chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee on Crime, we need a strong Supreme Court. We need to be able to foster criminal justice reform and for it to stand. We need the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We need the Supreme Court to stand behind us on that law. And we need to make sure that when you have a confirmation hearing, and when the confirmation hearing has the presentation of the nominees, and all the world is watching, and all the nation is watching, and individual members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, whose job it is to consent and affirm, ask the pointed question: do you believe in precedent? Do you believe in precedent? And each of the jurors that are now sitting and who formerly were the appointees of the former President of the United States, each of them answered, yes, I believe in precedent. That is a basic anchor of Supreme Court law. Do you believe in precedent? Each answered, and yet, in a catastrophic decision that went against the soil of Texas, Sarah Weddington, who led the case of Roe v. Wade, a Texan, her very soul in the soil of Texas was blotted with their answer that they believed in precedent, yet they joined, eliminating the decades-long precedent of the right to reproductive rights in this nation. If that is not a call for freedom, that is not a call to join with progressives in organizing a fresh nationwide push for changes at the Supreme Court, as has been indicated by the New York Times, if it's not a rejection of the idea of court packing for court justice. And if it is a recognition that the report by the President's study panel is a good document in history, but it doesn't bring about changes because it is not stepped where it should step, which is to be a problem solver. And so as we come today, let me give you a mountain of reasons, which I've already done, to say that the people must now act to be able to save the third branch of government, the highest court in the land. We can do it, and it could be no fault to us, no insult to the laws. It will be a stand-up to the law to ensure that when you go to the United States Supreme Court, the people's voices will be heard, and the law will stand up, and we will have the ability to have a kind of court that protects each and every American in the sanctity of democracy and freedom, and protects generations yet unborn. I don't know about you, but as I started, the call has come. Freedom is needed, and the people must stand. And we must set the court free by joining with legislation that provides us the opportunity for a court that addresses the needs of the American people. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. I am so delighted that you all are here, and I want you to know that I'll need to go through the reasons that you're here because my colleagues have done so already. I'm just glad that the Congressional Caucus assigned me to this task force, and I get to work with these two dynamic members of Congress. And it's, no tough thinking about getting on Hank's legislation. I eagerly did so. I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to be really brief. I want to tell you this is a series. This is the first in a series. We think that there are other things that need to be covered. We think that we need to hear from other perspectives. And we think that our primary purpose here is to elevate this issue to the urgency it deserves. So kind of look out for an addition to this series. Secondly, I want to thank our panelists, Sean Eldridge, who's the founder and president of Stand Up America, Meagan Hatcher-Mays, who's an advisory board member on Take Back the Court, and Christopher King, who's a leading advocate for democracy in courts that advance justice and equity. I want to give them having an opportunity to hear about their work. So I'm going to ask if each of them would give us a very short opening statement about the work that they've been doing and the urgency that they see. And then I'm going to hand it over to my staff member, Raina Hackett, who's been working with she and Grace Yeki, who's been working so hard on bringing this together here today. But Raina will be our moderator. So I want us to get to it. So in order of, why don't you just sit there if you don't mind? Because I know everybody has questions, and I know that there's a conversation that needs to be had. But you are very encouraging to me that you are here. God bless.
Hi everyone, I'm Meagan Hatcher-Mays. I am here in my capacity as an advisory board member for Take Back the Court. I almost said my old job. I'm really excited to be here on their behalf. They're the only organization that works to expand the court exclusively. One of the reasons I think we're all here today is that we're not talking about, sort of petty disagreements with the Supreme Court, like, oh, well, I have a differing view about statutory interpretation than Samuel. We're here because the court is supposed to be an integral part of a functioning democracy. And the court itself has become hostile to our democracy, which makes our democracy dysfunctional. So this isn't just a matter of like, oh, I have sour grapes because this case didn't go the way I wanted. I'm here because our democracy depends on a Supreme Court that is fair and just. And this court is not that because it has been basically bought and paid for by wealthy, very extremist special interests. So that's why court expansion is so critically important. Congress absolutely has the power to add seats, and these justices who have gone completely off the rails need to be reined in, and this is the best way for Congress to do it. Thank you.
Good evening. It's great to be here. As the Congresswoman said, I'm Sean Eldridge. I'm the founder and president of Stand Up America. Meagan is very humble. She's really helped lead on this issue from day one, and I want to thank the members of Congress for their leadership and for bringing us together tonight. I may be the only non-lawyer here. Certainly I'm sandwiched between two lawyers, so I will refer all your legal questions to the actual lawyers. But my message is really this, that Americans care about this issue. We have nearly 2 million members across the country in every single district across the country who've taken action and in demanding Supreme Court reform. Because as we've heard, and as we'll talk about more tonight, our fundamental freedoms, our democracy are at stake right now. My organization focuses on democracy issues, protecting voting rights, fighting big money in politics, and working to build a truly representative democracy. All of that is obviously at stake with this Supreme Court. We heard a lot about the issues that are at stake. One thing I want to add is that the popularity of this court and the trust that the American people have in the Supreme Court is at a historic low. Gallup for decades has tracked whether the American people trust the Supreme Court, and we are at record lows. And it's no surprise when we see the dangerous overturning of precedent that is harming millions of Americans. It's no surprise when we see unprecedented corruption on this court to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars that justices have received in gifts from right-wing donors. And there are some folks who believe that that Supreme Court reform is extreme. What I would close with is that I think inaction in the face of what this court has done and is ready to do would be extreme. And as Congressman Johnson said, Congress has changed the size of the Supreme Court 7 times in our country's history. This is precedented, it is needed, and we're very happy to be part of this coalition.
Hi, my name is Chris Kang. I'm co-founder of Demand Justice. We started the organization in 2018 to try to get progressives more educated and activated around the need to fight for our courts. And so I am incredibly delighted and honored to be here. I'm particularly excited that Congresswoman Watson Coleman said this is going to be a series. This is going to be a series of conversations to raise this issue and push on the urgency. I couldn't agree more with Congresswoman Jackson Lee. Like, this is the time. Our time is now, and the urgency is here. And this is an issue that has gone so far, so fast. I remember when Meagan and I were standing with Congressman Johnson and Congressman Nadler and Jones and Senator Markey about 3 years ago, little less than 3 years ago, on steps of the Supreme Court to introduce the Judiciary Act. There were only a handful of co-sponsors then. People thought that this was an extreme idea. It was an unpopular idea. They remember FDR talking about packing the courts and like this was just a third rail of politics. Well, look where we are now. 70% of Democrats support Supreme Court expansion. A majority of people overall support expansion. A majority of independents in some polls. Certainly 70% of African Americans, 60 to 70% of Hispanics, 70% of women, 70% of young people. Why? In part because of the leadership of the members of Congress you see here and those who are fighting to really raise the urgency of this issue, to talk about the fact that our Supreme Court has become too political and too powerful, but also because you sort of understand that the reason we're in this place is because we as progressives have not fought for our courts. We have sat this fight out. We have thought that if we engage, if we fight for our court, we're gonna politicize it. So the better thing is to recede and not engage. But if we're not engaging and only one side is doing the talking, only one side is getting energized, only one side is showing up and making this an electoral issue, you're gonna end up with a 6-3 Republican supermajority, in spite of the fact, as Congressman Johnson said, that Democrat presidential candidates have won the popular vote 7 out of the last 8 elections, that Democratic senators have represented more people, more Americans than Republicans, even as the Senate confirmed President Trump's nominees. We have this court that needs to be reformed. And I think we're at this point now where the question shouldn't be, why should we expand the court? I think the question should be, why shouldn't we? Right? When we have these conversations with people, we ask them, do you think the Supreme Court is broken? It shows that poll after poll shows people understand that it's broken. I just saw my way over here today, 58% of people have little or no faith that the Supreme Court's gonna make the right decision in an electoral decision in the 2024 election. American people know this court's broken. If you know the court's broken, what is the solution? What is the solution that is constitutional and that's gonna restore balance today? There are a lot of important reforms. Congressman Johnson's leading the way on term limits, on ethics reform. There are a lot of other things. Those are super important, but they don't do anything about the court we have today. And so I would challenge people, if you have this conversation, if somebody you're talking to says, oh, I agree with you, the Supreme Court's broken, I don't know that expansion's the right answer, what is their answer? And I think particularly that comes to members of Congress. I'm so excited to see the growth of support for the Judiciary Act. We're at more than 60 members of Congress, but honestly, we should be much higher than that. And so that's why this conversation is so important. That's why the series of conversations is so important. That's why the work that everybody's doing in this room is so important, because we need to expand that so that the representation and support for this bill in Congress reflects the support amongst the American people.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's really a privilege to be here. Thank you to the members of Congress who are here and to our panelists. This is going to be more of an interactive discussion rather than a panel, so please feel free to write down your questions and think of them, and then we'll leave some time for a Q&A at the end. Now, I'm going to be a little repetitive with this question as you just addressed it, but why should we expand the Supreme Court, and how will this benefit underserved communities? And anyone can jump in. Okay, well, look, Chris, I think just said this, there's lots of reforms on the table to fix the court in the long term. Term limits is one. Obviously, it's almost comical that the Supreme Court doesn't have to follow an ethics code and gets to just go on vacations on private planes and drink really expensive bottles of wine. When I was a congressional staffer, that was not allowed, but I guess the stakes are a lot lower if you're a Supreme Court justice. None of those address the court that we have currently. And the court that we have currently is not just sort of chronically corrupt, they're also hostile to democracy. And there's no real legal reason or justification why the court should say, oh, well, we're gonna gut the Voting Rights Act now. I mean, the justification they gave is that it's working so well that we don't need it. So they gutted it and then gutted it again and then gutted it again and then kept the door open to gut it again. So what we have is a court that is not only interested in undermining our ability to participate in democracy, but to take as much power as they can so that they can influence democracy without any consequence. So this is a court that is taking as much power from the judiciary as they can. I think there's a case pending called Relentless, or you may have heard of it called Loper Bright, where the court is basically deciding whether or not federal agencies should be able to issue rules and regulations, or whether the court gets to decide whether we can have clean air or clean water or a labor board. So this is a court that is taking as much power as they can away from elected officials, away from the president, away from those other branches of government, so that they can rule basically as kings with no consequences whatsoever. And then they have the audacity, one of them at least, to go to the Wall Street Journal and say, I, Samuel Alito, do not believe Congress has the authority to regulate the court at all. We're not even talking about court expansion. He doesn't think Congress has the authority to impose an ethics code on the Supreme Court. He doesn't think that Congress has the authority to impose term limits. He doesn't think Congress has the authority to add seats to the Supreme Court, even though he himself is sitting in a seat that was added by Congress. So this is what we're talking about. This is the runaway train at the Supreme Court. So they are behaving as extremists, and so the response needs to be as big as the attack. And right now, a lot of people are worried about this, sort of tit for tat that might happen if we add seats to the Supreme Court. I just am here to say we're already in it. We're already in this cycle of tit for tat, if you want to call it that, where, oh, well, Republicans might respond with this if we do this now. Republicans already did respond. Why do you think they held that seat open after Scalia passed away? Why do you think they never held that hearing for Merrick Garland? It's because they get it. They want power we're already in this sort of vicious cycle of power grabbing at the Supreme Court. Expansion is the only thing that gets us out of it. It's the only thing that, you know, at this sort of late hour protects our democracy from 6 unelected kings/queen who are not interested in the popular will and just want to rule by fiat. That's why this is so critically important. None of us woke up one day and just thought, oh, it'd be really fun to add seats to the Supreme Court for no reason. It's the only option when the Supreme Court is this hell-bent on destroying our democratic institutional values.
So I'd like to add on, I'll yield to you, Sheila, if you wanted to add on first.
I'll say 2 quick things.
Okay.
You know, political scientists estimate that it will take until 2065 at the soonest for us to rebalance the Supreme Court. We can't afford that. That's our kids and our grandkids' freedoms and their democracy. That is so much at stake. So time is of the essence. And I would also just add that I don't think this is just about stopping more bad things from happening. If we expanded the court, we could overturn Citizens United, close the floodgates of billionaire spending and corporate spending in our elections, which would strongly diminish corporate power in DC and have a huge impact. We could finally, you know, uphold and enact gun safety laws and protect our environment and ensure that climate action isn't at risk at the court. There's so much that we could do in a positive way for our country, for our democracy. So this isn't just defense. This is offense to get the progress that I think the American people badly want. But I yield to you, Congressman.
The constitutional intent of the founding fathers, and there are a lot of dusty papers that you have to probe through, was to have a balanced government. The legislature, which we claim, because of other legislatures that should be the most powerful, but they are on an equal plateau of the first, and then of course the executive, and then the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court completely extinguishes the powers of the legislature and the executive, that is imbalance. That is not what the founding fathers intended. And that is what is happening with the Supreme Court now. They are so bold that they are upsetting thoughtful executive orders or executive orders, rules and regulations that have come out of the executive. They are overturning legislative acts by the Congress on no basis. And they are setting themselves up as the singular power of law in this country. I mean, I will never get over, and I think you should just turn this around over and over again. I think the second would be the Shelby case, but I think number one is Roe v. Wade. Because Roe v. Wade had 50 years of precedent. And it is what all lawyers are taught. It's what all courts are taught, that there's something extremely valuable to precedent. And please go back and look at the video. When I think it was, it might have been Vice President Harris, I think the last actor she had on the court, on the panel, and maybe one other, I can't remember, maybe Amy Klobuchar, but in any event, we asked the jurors, both of them, Amy Barrett-Coney and Barrett, and Kavanaugh about precedent. And they specifically said that they adhere to precedent. And then you add them to the court because you believe that it's not only that precedent, but there's clean air precedent, there's antitrust law, there's contract law that has been settled law. We call it settled law. And it's settled law because it's in the best interest of the American people. It's in the best interest of generations to come. And they completely upset that. They completely rejected their own oath of office and their own duty. And they said it under oath that precedent is what I believe in. And then with no sense of regret or sadness, they overturned Roe v. Wade, which is one of the most glaring mountains of precedent that one could have had. So I really do think that when you think of the court, you have to think of the damage that will continuously be done if we maintain the status quo. So we're not looking to pack a court. I don't want to use that terminology. I just want to be able to say that we have a court that is in, comports with, I believe, the intentions of the founding fathers, which didn't do all the good things, women, slavery, but the intent was to have this balance so that we would be fair to the American people. And I yield back.
And in order to have that fairness, you gotta have that heterogeneity, and you don't have that right now. And so one of the reasons that I think it's so vitally important that we engage in these conversations, folks, is that if not now, when? Everything that we consider sacred and part of the victory of the fight that went on so long, that provided some equity, which we've not really achieved, but that more advancing towards equality, from how we live to who we live with, to who we are, and to agency of our own bodies, everything. So whether or not we can vote to make a determination as to who's going to represent my interests, every bit of it is on the table right now. And one of the reasons that we have to have this series, and we have to push it out and push it out and push it out, is that the urgency of the need is right now. That I'm embarrassed that New Jersey, specifically Mercer County, specifically Hamilton, sent 2 members to the Supreme Court, Scalia and Alito. I can't understand how that happened. That was an intentional evil act on the part of somebody, that you would get 2 people like that out of Mercer County. But Congresswoman is absolutely right. We're not trying to pack the court. We're just trying to seek a balance. We're trying to seek a reflection of the heterogeneity of ideas, thoughts, and physical representation.
Yeah.
We really need to expand the court, not 10 years from now, but today, because the problem is, over the next 2 years, a out-of-control extremist United States Supreme Court is poised to change American liberty as we know it. They are reckless and out of control. They are young people. Roberts, the Chief Justice, who has worked since he was a law school student on Federalist Society ideology, and every step that he has taken in his professional career has been to carry out that agenda. He's only 69 years old. He's the Chief Justice, and he's not in bad physical condition as far as I can see. I think he's got at least another 15 years, maybe 20, but it won't take that long to deconstruct the democracy that we have known and put in another free market capitalist democracy for certain groups of people kind of system. That can be accomplished pretty quickly. I mean, Thomas, who's vowed to stay on for another 10 years, he's 75 years old. He can make it to 85, especially sitting there not saying anything. And Justice Alito, 73 years old. He's going to be there for a while. He's committed to this trajectory that the court is on. And then you've got 3 young'uns, Gorsuch, who is 56, Kavanaugh, who's 58, and Coleman Barrett, who is 52. We can't afford to let this court, an activist court, with Citizens United, they actually discarded the case that was on appeal, the issues in the case that was on appeal, and decided the case on issues that they wanted to decide it on. I mean, literally had the parties to go back and brief an oral argument on an issue that wasn't even raised in the initial appeal. In the Shelby County case, destroying Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, disregarding 10,000 pages of legislative findings, and just totally disregarded that. On abortion, just overturning precedent, just simply, I thought it was wrong. And I've always disagreed with it, so therefore we got the power, we're gonna change it now. That's the kind of activism that is in place on the court, and we can't allow that to continue. We must expand the court now. And let me take the opportunity to say that I appreciate so much the activism of the panelists, Sean and Meagan and Chris, for what they have done to actually bring this to the public's attention. Great work.
So let me piggyback on that, because even the president, thank you so much.
Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you. Even the president of the United States recognized that we had a problem with the Supreme Court, and that he needed to call a commission, right? To look at kinds of things that needed to be addressed as it related to the Supreme Court. Can you all give me your impression as to why the members of the commission refused to deal with the expansion of the court as a possibility of correcting some of the things that we were seeing immediately that needed to be corrected? Why would they shy away from that consideration and recommendation for the here and now?
So that is a great question, and I think the reality is that the commission was set up to fail. The commission was intended to have, it was intended to be a bipartisan commission, so they had commissioners who thought everything was fine with the court. So they wouldn't even acknowledge there was a problem that needed to be solved. But then the president's directive to the commission was, don't give me any recommendations. So the commission itself was forced to only look backward and not to look forward, not to look for a solution. And I think there's silver lining, if there is one, is I think you're right, Congresswoman, that at least President Biden felt in that moment he had to do something. He understood in that moment, in the last days of the presidential campaign, when Republicans went through and confirmed a justice after 60 million Americans had already voted, he needed to do something about the courts. So it's like, oh, well, I'll at least do a commission. And I think it's that kind of energy and activism that we have to force the president to confront this court again as we look toward this next year. I think as Congresswoman Jackson talked about, we talk about restoring balance and the need for Supreme Court expansion to restore balance. And it is definitely out of balance with 6 Republican points and 3 Democratic ones. When we talk about that, it's also very much out of balance, as Congresswoman Jackson said, when it comes to our system of government and the 3 branches of government, the checks and balances. And this idea that the Supreme Court keeps grabbing more and more and more power for itself at the expense of Congress, at the expense of the president. Congress passes a voting rights law almost unanimously, the Supreme Court strikes it down. The president tries to do something about climate change or immigration, the Supreme Court knocks it down. States try to do something about gun violence prevention through their democratically elected branches of government, the Supreme Court knocked it down. It's grabbing more and more power for itself. What is government supposed to do? Step in and restore balance. You have leaders in Congress who are saying, we're gonna do our part, we're gonna look at legislation to expand the court, have term limits, have an enforceable code of ethics, the bare minimum you would think to try to wrest a little bit of power. The executive branch so far has sat this out. So we need to force this to be a discussion over the course of this year and see if we can reclaim some of that energy so that we can have this fight, so that we can have the discussion and we can restore balance among the 3 branches of government. The one thing I would pick up to that Meagan said, because I think the response we most often get and the concern that's most often put to us is this idea of tit for tat. Well, if we do it, then Republicans will do it and won't we be in a downward spiral? And on the one hand, I think Meagan's right that we're already in that downward spiral. On the other hand, I would actually wish we were in a tit for tat. You think about what's happened, the tit was President Obama won an election. The tat was they left the seat open, right? And so when Republicans did not even give Merrick Garland a hearing, Democrats did not respond forcefully enough. So then what happened? President Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch, too extreme to get bipartisan support that was required. Republicans changed the rules so it could be confirmed without a filibuster, without 60 votes, bare majority. What did Democrats do? Nothing. So then what happened when you had a Supreme Court justice credibly accused of sexual assault and perjury? Democrats, and confirmed them anyways, what did Democrats do? Nothing. So then what happens when you have a Supreme Court vacancy open months, weeks before an election, 60 million Americans already voted? If you're Mitch McConnell and Republicans, why not grab that seat? Why not take what was, to them, a tenuous 5-4 majority and make it a 6-3 supermajority? Why? Because they know that Democrats won't do anything. We're not even in a tit for tat, but we're still in a downward spiral. If we had the moment in 2020 when, if Mitch McConnell really thought Democrats in Congress would respond by expanding the court, and he might be on the wrong side of a 7-6 court, they might not have filled that seat. But he knew that wasn't even a question, so why not grab it? So I think part of this is, Megan's right, we need Supreme Court expansion to interrupt this cycle, to force Republicans to realize that they can't do whatever they want to our court in order to advance their special interests without some consequence. But the other thing I would say is, say we pass the Judiciary Act, we have 4 more Democratic appointed justices, we restore balance to the court. Republicans someday get power back and they add some more seats to take back the majority in the court. We see time and time again, it is a politically fundamentally different thing for Congress to pass a law to expand rights, to bring back access to abortion, to do something about climate change, to allow gun violence prevention measures to move forward, to protect our rights. Then if Republicans expand the court in turn to rip those things away, it won't be a back and forth forever. It'll just be a back and forth once, and they will be out of power. We've seen what happens already with the response throughout the country, even in very conservative states, to what the Supreme Court has done to overturn Roe versus Wade. That's the electoral backlash that will happen if Republicans were to take power and add more seats to take our rights away. It's fundamentally a different thing. And I think it's that we have to sort of understand. Like, Congresswoman Watson Coleman's right about the urgency of this moment. And I can't tell you, like, I'm both, as you can tell, I'm very animated about this. But I'm at the same point, like, I'm excited. I love being in rooms like this, but I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm a little bit frustrated because we went from these like 4 co-sponsors on the steps of the Supreme Court to 60 pretty quickly. We've been stuck at 60 now for more than a year. Since Roe versus Wade was overturned, I think literally 5 new Democratic members of Congress have added their names to this bill. Now, on the one hand, you think, well, that says a lot about the 60 who joined early, who knew where this court was going, knew what needed to be done. What does it say about the rest of them? That even the overturning of Roe versus Wade wasn't enough to wake them up and understand that we need real reform broadly supported by the Democratic people in order to restore balance and have a court that advances equity and justice. And I think that this moment and the sense of urgency is what's somehow lacking, and we really have to find a way to push past the apathy of this bipartisanship that led to this Supreme Court commission, and really find a way to break through and meet the urgency of this moment.
And if
Could I ask, how many staffers are here from various offices? Could you raise your hand and tell us what offices you are here on behalf of, and whether or not your boss is signed on to the judiciary? Well, I guess you don't have to do it. At least tell us who you are and who you are here for.
My name is Jade Eisenblatt. I'm the legislative correspondent for Congresswoman Coleman, and I do believe she has signed on.
I'm Janique Jules. I'm the staff assistant of Congressman Jim Himes.
Anybody else?
I'm Kaylin McBride. I'm press secretary for Rep. Stansbury.
I'm Chesney Cunningham. I am the policy assistant for Representative Chantel Brown.
Anybody else? Who else?
I will say that I love the fact that those are some names of people who aren't on the bill yet. Because I really think that it shows a lot about the interest and the need to learn more and to think about this. And maybe it's your own interest, maybe it's your boss's, but these are the kind, that's why this conversation is so important and why I'm so grateful to Congresswoman Watson Coleman and Johnson and Jack Lee for having this. And I do think that those of you who are members whose bosses are on it, to take the opportunity at lunch or wherever to badger your friends in other offices and find out whether or not they're on it, and if not, why not. And there are so many, like between our organizations and between all of these, there are other people in this room from great organizations who lead Conservation Voters, Center for Popular Democracy, there's some others here. Like there's a lot of resources of folks who are willing and really enthusiastic about helping, trying to resolve any questions that your bosses or you might have.
Can I just say one really quick thing? It kind of goes back to your earlier question about why ADCs. I just want to emphasize that the reason that we got into this mess is because of a 50-year coordinated effort that was ultimately successful to take over the Supreme Court and install these very hard right conservative Supreme Court justices, and they were hand-selected for a purpose. And the purpose was that you know going in how they're going to rule. Because Republicans had some pretty high-profile mistakes where, they thought David Souter was going to be a reliable Republican vote. They thought John Paul Stevens was going to be a reliable Republican vote on the court, and they weren't. They flipped, or they realized how life works and changed their mind. That's actually not what we're asking for. We're not asking for 4 new seats that are guaranteed votes for all of the things that I want. Like, for example, my beautiful student loans. I would love to have those forgiven. It's about putting 4 people on the Supreme Court who care about democracy, who can be trusted with our democracy and with administrative law and with our constitutional rights. It's really not about, to Chris's point, it really isn't about a tit for tat. It's not about putting, 4 leftist extremists to counteract the hard right extremists like MAGA justices that we have now. It's about restoring the public's faith in the court. Right now, the public doesn't believe that the court is doing the right thing. And the court doesn't work if the public doesn't believe that the court is doing the right thing. They derive their legitimacy from all of us and our belief that they're doing what's right. So what we're asking for when we ask for court expansion is 4 judges who believe in the Constitution. They might not always rule the way that I want them to, but I know that I will be able to trust that that decision was made fairly and not because they got a cool trip on a boat to Indonesia or whatever. That's what we're talking about. It's not about,
They have some track record.
Right. It's not like what the Federalist Society did where they're literally funneling the most conservative law students they can find into big law and then into the lower courts and then ultimately to the Supreme Court. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and if I may, I think this is the perfect question to transition into the audience Q&A. But firstly, what can the average American at home do to raise attention to these issues and spread awareness about court expansion? If there's someone feeling helpless, what should they do?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, we are far from helpless, and I don't think activists are waiting for the White House to lead. I think we're grateful for the congressional leadership. We know on so many issues in our country's history, the White House has often been the last stop, not the first stop to progress. Look, our members are fired up. We've driven over 100,000 constituent calls and emails to Congress on expansion alone. So my apologies to those answering the phones, but in every single district, our members are asking folks to co-sponsor. Our members have submitted thousands of letters to the editor across the country to make the case, to talk about all the important issues and points that have been made tonight. We've had hundreds published across the country because we have to speak up and educate folks about how these issues are connected to the kitchen table issues that they're worrying about every night. So we need more of that activism, and we need to be educated voters, right? When we go to vote, know where our representatives stand on this issue. And I think Congressman Johnson, brought up in his opening remarks a really important point that I do think depoliticizes this issue and this tit for tat comment, which is Congressman Johnson has led on those 3 important reforms that our organization has endorsed. Expanding the court to 13 seats, which would match the number of circuits in our country. So there's a reason behind that number. Creating term limits so that no one has unchecked power for life. which I do think would depoliticize this conversation after an expansion vote. And to pass Supreme Court ethics. I think that the package of those three reforms is badly needed, would have a powerful impact on all the issues we've talked about, and I do think would reset where we are at in terms of the norms of the Supreme Court. So our members are demanding action on all three, and will hopefully be Supreme Court voters who show up thinking about this issue on election day as well.
Wonderful. Now we can get some questions for the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and one of the staff members will give you the microphone.
Hi, I'm Mark Dan with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we're really happy that there's over 60 co-sponsors on the House side, but on the Senate side, it's even worse, and especially on Senate Judiciary Committee. What are you guys seeing that, quite frankly, the Senate doesn't?
Yeah, I think that the senators tend to be more conservative. They are institutionalists, and they are reticent to change anything fundamentally. So when it comes to adding seats to the United States Supreme Court, they are just reluctant to get on the bandwagon. I think there were probably, the same mentality existed among those who were appointed to the task force that looked at the courts that Mr. Kang talked about. There's the conservatism and the reluctance to change is something that we need to confront. It exists mostly among older people. Older people find it difficult to consider that things could be good if they're changed. And so we have a lot of conservatism among Democrats in the Senate. Don't want to rock the boat. The Senate itself is an old, stodgy institution that is not a very democratic organ of government itself. It's used to privilege and power and, insularity, and it's a part of our democracy has gotten to this point where you've got the House of Representatives that will lay down for a dear leader, and then a Senate that, due to its archaic procedures and processes, doesn't work well, won't produce very much. So it's a part of the decline of our democracy. And we really need, things like the filibuster, things like two senators from every state, regardless of population. Why should a state of California with 44 million people and the state of Wyoming with less than 500,000 people have two senators be equal in that way? Those little small states have the outsized power in the United States Senate. So we're looking at an institution that needs reform, and the people that are in it now would oppose that. So, we got a lot of work to do in the Senate.
So I think the dysfunction of the court is at some point going to impact people who are not Black, people who are not immigrants, people who are not poor. That they're going to go so far as they're going to impact, folks in the rural communities and the rural states. They're going to take the rights away from people who thought, well, this was like concrete. So to me, the Senate has to be targeted differently. We haven't, I know that the House has been targeted to some degree, and so ergo you got 65 or so co-sponsors, but we need to target us more as well. But people need to show up at the town halls and the Senate has. They need to inundate the senators. I don't care who they are. You need friends in Utah and Wisconsin and Wyoming who are inundating the senator's offices with, why aren't you doing this? This makes sense. The other thing I think is that when I think of this conversation we're having today as part of a series, is that we don't want people to look at this proposal as some radical, progressive, those left-wing, folks. I want them to look at it kind of historically as well. And so I'm looking to bring in a historian, as well as someone who is sort of a national advocate for something that's like women's reproductive rights or something like that. Having an open conversation with them so that people can hear it without there being sort of a partisan import to it. So maybe you think that I wouldn't be sitting up here, we could be sitting out there. Because I think people need to see it for the issue that it is and how this court is, the dysfunction of this court or the meanness of this court or the evilness of this court or the ignorance of this court is impacting negatively our quality of life and our impression of what a democracy is supposed to be. So that is a great question. That is an excellent answer, but I don't want the members of the Senate to be so angry at what he just said about it, and they don't come on board with the legislation that makes so much sense for this country.
Okay, this is going to be our second to last question.
Hi, Devin Ambres with CAP. I want to piggyback off of your comments about the Supreme Court taking away the rights of not just Black people, not just poor people, but everybody. And I want to toss this up to you guys as kind of a leading question for our Hill staffers here. Next week, we talked about a little bit about Chevron, but Corner Post is going to get argued at the end of the month. And even absent bad outcome in November, this trifecta of Jokezi, Corner Post, and Chevron could really result in the ability of the court to supercharge Project 2025 and really be a true threat to democracy. So I'm interested to hear how you guys are touching that position and helping explain to the Hill staffers really what the threat the court actually poses is.
Well, where do I begin? The thing, I think I've talked about this before. It's just that it's just not a strategy to hope that this court does the right thing. It just isn't. They're not going to. They'll do like a string of really bad things, like they'll gut as much of the Voting Rights Act as they can, and then at the very last minute they'll be like, okay, we're not going to go that last step. And then when they don't go that last step, they get fawned over in the press, like, oh, amazing, as we expected, they upheld democracy. We really need folks, just regular voters to understand that this court is not just some sort of untouchable thing that doesn't really affect you. And that even if on its surface one case seems to be about herring fishermen, it's not really. It's about whether or not HHS can provide you with medication that you need or whatever the case may be. This isn't really what you asked, but I guess I've just been thinking, to the extent that some people feel like, well, I don't want to be on the bill because it will politicize the court. I just want to say that the politicization ship has sailed over the seas of partisan. It's over. Like, the court is political now. And they're doing favors for Republicans, and relentless, if that's a negative outcome, that will be a favor for oil companies and union busters and anti-abortion activists. They're doing favors for Republicans. A lot of stuff that Republicans want to do is actually quite unpopular, but if the court can do it, it protects elected Republicans from catching any of the heat, right? So they can be like, oh good, we got rid of abortion, but I didn't have to take a vote. That's like the perfect setup for what's going on right now. So people really need to understand it. And I think, to the question about, why doesn't the Senate do more? I agree with everything Representative Johnson said. It's a messy institution. I have no quarrel with anything he said. But also I think there's a generational thing where some people still think of the court as a grantor of rights, If you just ask the average person, like name a Supreme Court case, they'll probably say Brown v. Board, or they might say Roe v. Wade. Those are cases that gave us rights. They expanded access to constitutional rights to people who didn't previously have them. And so as a result, the Supreme Court's been riding the high of that good PR for like 70 years. That needs to come to an end. That's over. That era of the court was only 60 years in time. It was only however long, Warren or whatever was Chief Justice. It wasn't very long. The actual history of the court is doing favors for big business, restricting rights for women and people of color. That's the actual history of the court. And then there was this tiny little window here where they were doing nice things for marginalized people. And that goodwill has extended well past its expiration date. And I think that's where the Senate is at now, where they're like, oh, well, they did do that nice thing 70 years ago, so I don't know. It's like they just haven't caught up with the reality of the court that we've got. And the court is just gonna keep taking advantage of the power they're grabbing for themselves in the cases that you mentioned until somebody stops them. And so far, Senate Democrats haven't shown a large appetite for doing that. That didn't answer your question, but that's just what I wanted to say.
Awesome. Do we have another question from the audience? This will be our last question.
Thank you. I am Doug Whitner with the League of Conservation Voters. We at LCV strongly support the Judiciary Act, so just very grateful for this conversation. My question for our members is, so we talked about how the bill is so vital for so many issues, and also a bit about how it's difficult and controversial, and thus, especially for an elected official, it is a courageous stand to be supporting this, in addition to how important it is. And I would just love to hear from our members about what was personally persuasive to you that made you think not just that this is an important thing, but that this is worth spending some political capital on and spending your finite time and energy among so many critical priorities.
Yeah, I determined to introduce the Judiciary Act on the Friday night that it was announced that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died. And right then and there, without, they didn't even care. Both President Trump and Mitch McConnell issued statements that evening, within hours of the announcement of her death, that they would be filling that appointment. And I determined then that then was the time to introduce the legislation. And it was long overdue from there. It should have been done earlier.
So I just thought that it was the right thing to do, and I didn't recognize that I was laying any political capital on the table to do it. I knew, I knew the trend. I knew what was happening. I knew what it meant to my friends in the LGBTQ community. I knew what it meant to women. I knew what it meant to people of color. I knew what it meant to poor people. I knew what it meant to drinking good water and breathing air. I just fundamentally knew that this court was taking us in the wrong direction, and it was really, it's an interesting thing is in Israel, the administration tried to coalesce all the power of the court under it. And in America, we had to fight like hell to stop the Supreme Court from taking all of our power. And so it was just out of the sense of, oh, hell no. We gotta do whatever we can. And I didn't see anything courageous about it. And I personally think that perhaps we haven't done enough marketing it, that there are probably a lot more members, at least in our house, that we could get on the bill. But there's so much stuff going on. You see what's happening. That is the most destructive, dysfunctional, do nothing, crazy, evil, majority that we've encountered. And it keeps you on your toes, just trying to stop some of the bad stuff. That you don't get a chance to work on the good stuff that you know that your friends would support. So I think we have to do more of focusing on what our agenda should be, and not just falling prey to the energy that their agenda zaps from us. Zaps, not zaps.
Yeah, I want to give my office staffers a lot of kudos for what they have done, even though this has not been something that rises to the level of immediate attention with a lot of members. But I want to give my staff a shout out for the work that they've done to produce where we are today. And of course, we never could have done that by ourselves. We never could have done that without the work of this group of people on the panel, as well as other outside groups, perhaps including yours, and thank you, to generate and galvanize popular support for this so that it bubbles up. And so as a result, we've got staffers here from other offices who are interested in this issue. You could have been doing something else this afternoon, spending your time somewhere else, but you voluntarily chose to come today, and we appreciate that. And I want to thank the Congressional Progressive Caucus, along with the chair of this, what do we call it? Task Force, Bonnie Watson Coleman, for taking up this issue and giving it the spotlight that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. And let me echo what the Congressman said about this tax work. I mean, that's how I know about the bills, because of this tax work. And so I don't mean to suggest that we're not doing our work. I just think that we need to have a strategy to market it more, vigorously in the midst of all this chaos that we're dealing with. And it would be great if there are organizations that the president looks to for support that says something about how important it is to do something with the Supreme Court, to talk to Congress about doing its job. So I think that we're probably kept you longer than you expected to be here. And I thank you so much for staying. I thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And I hope that I will see you when we have the next,
Can I say this? When the court overturns its reliance on the Chevron case, which is what the court does is defers to the judgment of the regulators for the most part. I'm not saying it in the same language that lawyers are supposed to use, but basically you're deferring to the expertise of agency professionals in enacting rules. So what this court is poised to do is to say that you can no longer do that. You've got to rely on what the House of Representatives passed in the legislation. You've got to rely, so regulators can't go off and do what they want to do, fine-tune these rules. You've got to stick with whatever Congress said, and if Congress didn't say it, then the regulators can't do it, which leaves us in a position where people's health, safety, and financial well-being are no longer regulated. So it means a free market capitalist society where there are no rules. And basically let the buyer beware. Your health and safety is something that only you are taking care of, not the government. And so when that starts to seep in, a lot of people in Montana and other small states, people who look a homogeneous society, the look of the homogeneous society, those folks will start figuring out that it's not the black folks, it's not the Latinos, it's not the Asians, it's not the
Whatever.
it's not the LGBTQ crowd. It's not them that are taking our rights away. It's that United States Supreme Court. So they are setting the stage for this issue to explode among a whole lot of just regular people who only want to they only want to make a fair wage for a fair day's work. They want to be able to retire one day. They want to see their children be able to advance further than they. And when that ceases to exist, when that dream goes away, people will be looking for who is responsible for it, and we're pointing the finger at the United States Supreme Court. So that's what's going to happen, I think.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.